everybody. Today we are going to switch gears from talking about the different oceans of our planet into what is actually underneath the surface of the ocean. So we're going to start talking about life in the ocean. We're going to get started today with a read aloud from our nonfiction book about oceans, and after that, in the next video, you're going to learn about the different layers of the ocean. Okay? So today we're reading this really bulky chapter called Life in the Ocean, and it's many pages, and the first time I read it, it was chock full of so many details that I kind of got overwhelmed. So what I've done to help us to organize our thinking as we're reading is I've made a main ideas and details organizer, and I'm actually going to give you guys the main idea ahead of time so that you can focus on thinking about the big chunks of details in this chapter. Okay, so if you're doing this in your notebook, the title of our chapter is Life in the Ocean. And I thought when I read it that the main idea is that there are a huge variety of animals and plants in the ocean. Forgot to add my punctuation at the end of that complete sentence. So I'll add that now. And I'll hold it up again in case you feel like copying it. The main idea is that there are a huge variety of animals and plants in the ocean. So we're going to get started reading, and I'm going to stop at a couple of points when I think that we've sort of gotten to the end of a chunk of key details. Here we go. Life in the ocean. The largest animal on Earth lives in the ocean. It is the blue whale. Blue whales can be up to 100 feet or 30 meters long. Some of the smallest animals on Earth live in the ocean too. Some plankton animals are so tiny that you need a microscope to see them. Sea jellies float on the top of the water. Tuna, cod, and other fishes swim a few feet below the surface. Deep down, there are octopuses and squid. These strange-looking animals have no bones, but they do have long tentacles called arms. Sharks and barracudas can be found in both deep and shallow water. I'm going to go back to take a look at some of our captions. It says here that the blue whale is the largest animal that has ever lived on Earth. Over here it says sea jellies, over here, float along the ocean's surface. These squid live off the coast of Southern California. And then this caption said, the gray reef shark is a fierce hunter. Shrimp, lobsters, and other shellfish live on the ocean's sandy floor. Sea stars, clams, sand dollars, sea urchins, and crabs sometimes live near the seashore or in tide pools. Sand dollars can be found along the ocean's sandy bottom. Giant red sea urchins live off the coast of British Columbia in Canada. So I put this little post-it note here because the first time I was reading it, I realized I'd gotten to the end of a chunk of details. And here was what I noticed. It started off with like an introduction. Do you remember during your Rainforest Animal Reports when you wrote an introduction? It introduces us to the topic by saying that both the largest and the smallest animals on Earth live in the ocean. And then it gives us some examples, and it starts by talking about animals like sea jellies that float on the top, and then it goes down through the ocean and says next there's tuna, cod, and other fish just a little bit below the surface. Keep going down, there's octopus and squid. Keep going down, there's sharks and barracudas, and then it talks about creatures that live on the floor or the sandy part of the ocean. So to summarize that chunk of details, what I'm going to write is that the ocean has large and small animals that live at different layers of the ocean. So, the ocean has large and, I'm going to hold it up so you can see. The ocean has large and small animals. Different animals live live in different let's say depths. So let's say live at different depths. Okay, because it gave lots of different examples, but I think the gist of that section was that the ocean has large and small animals and that different animals live at different depths. We'll dive more into that topic in our next video, but for now, let's keep reading and see what the next chunk of information tells us. It says, not all ocean animals can breathe underwater. Whales and dolphins are mammals that come up from below the surface to breathe air. Seals and sea otters are mammals that like to play in the waves. They often rest on rocks that stick above the water's surface. Over here the caption says, a harbor seal suns itself on a rock in the Pacific Ocean. And up here it says, a mother sea otter swims with her pup. So I know because I read this chapter ahead of time that I thought this was another important chunk. This section feels really different because it's talking about unique animals. They're mammals that can't breathe underwater. Things like seals and otters are mammals that have to live at the surface to breathe. So I'm going to write that down as our next big chunk. Some mammals live in the ocean. They come to the surface to breathe. Now we're moving on to kind of the last chunk that I noticed in this chapter. As we read, I want you to think, what's this next sort of section all about? It says, animals are not the only kind of living things in the ocean. There are also bacteria and algae. Like tiny ocean animals, bacteria and some algae are found in plankton. Plankton floats on or near the top of the water. Plankton is very important to all life in the ocean because many fish and other ocean animals eat it. I'm going to pause here to read our captions. It says, plankton contains hundreds of tiny ocean animals, algae, and bacteria. This picture was taken through a microscope. Over here, we're going to read about how rockweed is common on the coasts of New England. It says larger kinds of algae are called seaweeds. Some seaweeds grow up from the ocean bottom. Others float in the water. Although algae are not plants, they look like plants. Algae even make food from sunlight and water, just like plants. The biggest kind of seaweed is the giant kelp. It can be as tall as trees. Places where lots of kelps grow are called kelp forests. There is a giant kelp forest in the ocean off the coast of California. And then this caption says, this giant kelp grows in a kelp forest off the coast of California. So that's the end of our chapter. And I'm wondering if you figured out what that last section was about, just by kind of going back and reviewing. I thought that the gist of this last section was that life in the ocean isn't just about animals. There's also plants and things like plants, like bacteria and algae. So in this last section, I'm going to write down that plants, algae, and bacteria also live in the ocean. And since I have some room here, I'm also going to add that these become food for other animals. These become food for ocean animals. All right. So in the next video, we're going to look a little bit more closely at these plants and animals that live in the ocean and how there are different plants and animals at different layers in the ocean. See you back here.